starting a brand new series today called This or That. And in order to understand where the series is coming from, I really need to tell you something about myself. I have a one-track mind. I tend to get tunnel vision a lot. I'm not a multitasker. I am not the kind of person that can just shotgun out a whole bunch of stuff and do it. Whatever I get started on is what I focus on the whole time. In fact, when I'm offered too many choices, I tend to get overwhelmed and I start to shut down a little bit. And when that happens, especially when it comes to like food and restaurants and movies and places to just go and hang out, I tend to defer to the people that I care the most about, the people that I love and I value their opinion, and it ends up being this like, well, what do you want to do kind of thing. And the reality is that all of us, we have choices we make every day. And some of those choices are mundane and pointless, like, what shirt am I going to wear? What song do I want to work out to? Or what route do I want to take to my favorite restaurant today? Because there's 18,000 different options. It's just a matter of how long I want to take to get there. And some of those choices are absolutely vital to our lives and to our survival. Things like, well, who am I going to marry? What am I going to invest my money and my time in? And should I buy that car, that house, that truck? Should I buy that ring? Should I buy that TV? When we get too many choices, we tend to do like pinball machines used to do back in the day when you hit them a little too hard and they pop up and they say tilt. We just kind of shut down and nothing happens. We get overwhelmed and just freeze up and lock up. I mean, let's be honest. In our lives, what other choices do we have? Okay, as Jesus followers, we have a set of rules we're supposed to follow. And in all honesty, for some people, that list of rules keeps people from joining into this ecclesia, this movement that Jesus talked about with Peter when he said, I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my ecclesia, my church, my movement. The reality is we see things the wrong way when it comes to Jesus. We think that being a Jesus follower, just like in our regular lives, that the choices we have are this or that scenario. For example, we can either be fun or we can be a Christian. We can laugh at a joke or we can be Christians. We can go to a football game and dress in costume and cheer at the top of our lungs, or we can be Christians. We can enjoy greasy bacon, or we can be Christians. Obviously, I'm just kind of poking a little bit of fun here, but the reality is this is true. We've honestly gotten it into our heads that we can either be Jesus followers, or we can live a life that's fun. And here's what I mean. We believe that in some instances, we have to be dull and emotionless to be a good Christian. We believe that we have to choose between Jesus and actually living a life that we enjoy. The bottom line is this: being a follower doesn't mean that you can't live. Here's what I mean by that. Where do we get that idea from first? In order to figure out where that thought process comes from and where it actually has kind of inundated our churches and even into us as Jesus followers, we have to understand something that happened all the way back in the very beginning of the Old Testament, first book of the Bible, Genesis. Start in chapter 3, we see this interaction that we've read a million times, but we kind of misunderstand what actually happens here. In Genesis chapter 3, starting in verse 1, we see this interaction happen between Eve and a serpent in the garden. And it says this, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God actually say that you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, well, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. This right here, this moment, this one event in human history is the birth of our struggle between this or that. See, we look at it and we say, well, the serpent just convinced Eve to eat the fruit that God had told her not to eat. But that's not what really happened. The serpent actually, he planted doubt in Eve about God's goodness. He planted doubt. He actually gave Eve a choice of this or that. You could either miss out on something or have an amazing experience. The minute the serpent got a foothold in Eve with the this or that mentality, everything changed. For human history, for the rest of what we know as history, people began to think that God was holding out on them. We begin to think that obeying means sacrificing something good, and we begin to see the rules as a killjoy in our lives. We begin to think that in some way, we start thinking the same way that Eve did, that in that moment when we begin to see the rules that God laid out, that God is trying to possibly keep us from experiencing something that was good and enjoyable and pleasurable, something that would make us feel good on the inside as well as on the outside. But that's not what was really happening. In fact, Jesus tells us something completely different. He takes that idea of us living life and he goes back into this mindset of who the serpent is. And in John chapter 10, Jesus is talking about being the good shepherd, and he comes in and he talks about a thief coming into where the sheep are. And he says in verse 10, he says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. But then he makes this unbelievable statement. He says, I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly. He said, I didn't come to be able to steal, kill, or destroy. That's somebody completely different. Instead, I've come that you would be able to have life and that you would be able to live. Jesus came to bring us life, not just life, but an abundant life. The word for abundant literally translates to over and above, more than is necessary. Jesus came to help us understand that God's not a killjoy. Jesus over and over and over said, I and the Father am one. I am him. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He says, yes, there's these rules, but I've come here so that you could understand that you can have life. And life, not just the way that you think it is, but a life that is so much more. I've come so that you can experience life on a level that will leave you so fulfilled that no one will be able to understand it. See, when we follow Jesus, we get to experience the best of what God has to offer. We get to experience everything about the human experience and the human life. Now, that doesn't mean that we get to sin without consequence, because this is where we kind of get things twisted a little bit. Okay, we tend to think that in order to live life, that means that we have to do all the things that go against what God is telling us to do. That's not true. It doesn't mean that we get to sin without consequence. It just means that we get to engage with all the things that God created. It means that we can actually have the opportunity to remember what we did for fun the night before. It means that we don't have to have the lingering effects of the consequences of our sin that led to those things that maybe we did. It means we can still live life and enjoy it. It means that we can actually take a step outside of the rules and the regulations, and we can still live a life that engages with those, because the reality is the rules aren't there to kill our fun. The rules are there to give us a framework. They're guardrails. They're put in place as we walk through this life with Jesus to say, listen, if you go past this, you're going to be hurt. You're going to suffer something. If you go too far this way, something's going to happen and you're going to you're not going to like it. But if you stay within this framework, as you follow me, if you stay within this framework, you will experience joy. You will experience every single thing that I have for you. You'll be able to experience passion like you've never thought possible, because it will be driven by me. You'll experience fulfillment because it will be driven by me. You will be able to experience happiness like you never thought possible, because it will be driven by me. See, Jesus never came to give us a this or that scenario. Jesus said, I've come that you can have them both. You can have me and you can live. Because being a follower doesn't mean that you can't live. I have a couple of questions that I want you to start to ask yourself over the course of the next week and over the course of the next month and years. When you try to figure out whether or not you're going to enjoy something, whether or not you're going to do something, I want you to ask yourself these two questions. The first one is this: is this something that I'm going to enjoy? Because let's be honest, if it's not something you're going to enjoy, why in the world would you do it? If it's not something that you would enjoy, there's no sense in doing it, because all you're going to do is feel miserable the whole time that you do it. Which then again opens us up to this idea of, well, if it's enjoyable, it must be a sin. That's not true. In fact, Paul even said, listen, I want you to flee the very appearance of evil. Every kind of evil you can imagine, I want you to run away from it. I don't want you anywhere near it. So if you ask yourself that question, is this something that's enjoyable? Then, okay, yeah, there's a lot of things out there that are enjoyable that will bring you some sort of temporary enjoyment. But the second question you have to ask yourself before you do it is this: will this harm what people think of Jesus if they see me, a follower, do it? Now, I realize that may step on a few toes. But these questions aren't designed to ruin your life. They're not designed to ruin your fun. They're designed to help you show people Jesus through the fun that you have. They're designed to peel back the curtain and let you live life, but to do it through the framework of, how is this going to help me help lead people to a personal and growing relationship with Jesus? This was the issue that the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders never quite got the hang of. There's a story in the New Testament where Jesus and his disciples, they go and they have dinner with somebody. And when they go, they sit down and the disciples just start eating. And the Pharisees come to Jesus and they say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why didn't they wash their hands? Why didn't they wash their hands? They're supposed to make sure their hands are clean. And Jesus stops and he says, oh, hang on just a second. You are so worried about the outside of the cup, but what about the inside of the cup? It doesn't do any good if just the outside is clean if the inside isn't clean either. This idea, it's this thing that we call holiness. This morning I was on Facebook and I was looking through and I saw something that just kind of made me stop for a second. It's one of those things that you see it and you don't really think about it, but you know it. But it clarified so much. It made so much sense. There was a conversation happening between a pastor and one of his church members, and they were talking about bananas. And the church member was talking about how good bananas were and how great they were, and that it didn't really matter what the outside looked like because holiness wasn't necessarily an inside and outside thing. And the pastor said, okay, I get it. Like, think about a banana. You eat the inside of a banana and it tastes good regardless of what the outside looks like. So holiness could be just an internal thing. But then the pastor stopped him and he said, okay, well, let me ask you this. Would you ever stop to eat a banana that looked rotten on the outside? And the guy stopped and he said, well, no. And he said, exactly. You determine what things you want to be a part of based on what you see on the outside. If you see something that is holy on the outside, and you pick it and it looks great, but then you open it up and it's rotten on the inside, you'll never eat it. But if you know it's going to be good on the inside and you look at the outside and it looks just as good on the outside, you're more likely to go and do the same thing over and over and over. You're going to pick that same thing. This is the idea behind the this or that. A lot of times we make our decisions based off of what other people will see, but it doesn't leave anything on the inside of us changed. We're miserable on the inside. Because we've gotten into our heads that unless we put forward this perfect image of what a Jesus follower is, that we're missing the mark. But the reality is you can have just as much joy and fulfillment on the inside and be just as holy on the inside as we want to portray to the people that see us from the outside. So, what would actually happen if we showed people that Christians are fun too? What would it look like? Would people actually want to be like us? Would people start to flock to the churches the way that they flocked to Jesus? I mean, let's be realistic here. Let's be honest. People didn't flock to Jesus because he appeared to be dull and boring. They flocked to him because he had this charisma about him. They flocked because he knew the answers that they needed. They said over and over again, he doesn't carry himself the way that the Pharisees do. He doesn't carry himself the way that the Sadducees do. He was the embodiment. He was the embodiment of this combination of following the rules, but also living life. What would happen if we quit thinking that the rules were there to ruin our fun instead of just giving us boundaries in which to enjoy life to its fullest? I've met a lot of Christians over the years who have told me, well, I can't do that because I'm a Christian. And my question always has been, why? Why can't you smile more? Why can't you laugh? Why can't you get excited at church? Why can't you raise your hands? God doesn't want us to be miserable in our lives. Jesus came so that we could live an over-the-top, abundant life. Being a follower doesn't mean you can't live. In fact, it means the exact opposite. You can live a life more abundant than you could ever imagine. Because he lives, we know that we can trust him with our lives, our future, our joy, our passions, our successes, and even our failures. Because we know that he did it for us and that he came not to steal and kill and destroy our abundant life, but to give us one that would change us forever and draw people to him. Now, I have no idea what your relationship with Jesus looks like. That's between you and him. But I know this. If you're focusing more on what people see on the outside than what he sees on the inside, instead of letting the two merge together, then you're missing out. And my prayer and my hope is that today you will let the two finally come together and begin to ask yourself the questions. Is this something I will enjoy? And if I do it, will this actually show people who Jesus really is? Because if we do that, we can begin to move past the idea of I can do this or I can do that when it comes to our relationship with Jesus. Father, thank you for loving us. And thank you for wanting so much for us to be able to experience a life that is full of every emotion, everything that we never really give ourselves permission to feel. I pray that you will challenge the way that we see the rules that you've set out for us, and that we'll begin to see them not as rules, but as guardrails to protect us as we live life to the fullest. I pray that over the next few minutes and days and weeks and months and years that you will continue to show us what it means to enjoy life abundantly. Thank you for loving us and for always being there. In Jesus' name.